Welcome, everyone. I now call the April 2nd, 2024 regular City Council meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we begin, I would like to announce that during the month of Ramadan, we will be breaking briefly after sunset so that our Bothell community members can break fast without missing out on participating in council meetings. Ramadan holds significant religious importance for Muslims and is often recognized through fasting, acts of kindness and devotion, and personal growth. If you would like to learn more about Ramadan, consider reading more on the city's DEI Educational Resources webpage. Our break this evening will be at approximately 7:41 p.m. At this point, we will take a moment to take roll call of the council members by position number. Please say here when the city clerk calls your name. City clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Zorns.
Here.
Mayor Thompson.
Here.
Councilmember Alders.
Here.
Councilmember Kurd.
Here.
Councilmember Mankey.
Here.
Councilmember Dodd.
Here.
And Deputy Mayor Alcabra.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Before we continue with the rest of the agenda, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For remote meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And for council attending remotely, use the raise hand feature when you wish to speak. First up is meeting agenda approval. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to public engagement opportunities. We have the free pet event with Rainier Animal Fund Friday, April 5th from 12 to 3 p.m. You can bring your dog or cat to Bothell Police for vaccines, microchip, and pet license. First come, first serve. We've also got the Bothell Small Business Workshops Thursdays, April 11th through May 12th from 6 to 8:15 p.m. You can register for a 4-part workshop series for new and aspiring business owners. All sessions are in Bothell City Council chambers. All right, we have one proclamation tonight for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. There we go.
Good evening.
Oh, in a minute. I'm going to read it and then we'll be good. Whereas April 2024 marks the 23rd anniversary of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which draws attention to the fact that sexual violence is widespread and has implications for every community member. And whereas sexual assault is pervasive, every 68 seconds someone is sexually assaulted in the United States. And whereas over 53% of women and over 29% of men report experiencing contact sexual violence in their lifetime, 47% of all transgender people have been sexually assaulted at some point in time in their lives, and young people under 18 account for about 44% of reported sexual assaults. And whereas sexual violence can impact people of any age, gender, religion, ethnicity, and identity, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, people living in poverty, LGBTQ+ people, elders, people with disabilities, and others who have been historically oppressed are disproportionately affected by sexual violence in significant and complex ways. And whereas the City of Bothell takes a strong stand against sexual assault and is dedicated to eliminating this and other acts of gender-based violence that threaten the safety and well-being of all individuals, children, and families. And whereas by working together as a community, we can stand up to and actively disrupt harmful attitudes and behaviors that contribute to sexual violence and alleviate the trauma of sexual violence by ensuring supportive resources are available to all survivors. Now, therefore, I, Mason Thompson, Mayor of the City of Bothell, do hereby proclaim April 2024 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month in the City of Bothell, joining advocates and communities across the country in taking action to prevent sexual violence and to stand with survivors and victims of sexual assault. And we have somebody here to accept. I'm going to come give this to you. If you want to just hit this, you can say a couple words and introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Heaven Struthers. I am a resident of the City of Bothell. I am an advocate as well as a speaker on the Speakers Bureau at King County Sexual Assault Resource Center. I've been on the Speakers Bureau for about 9 years. I'm here to accept the Sexual Assault Awareness Month proclamation on behalf of the organization, so thank you for being part of the solution to sexual violence. I am a mother of 4 children, 2 of them of which have been sexually assaulted and abused by their father 11 years ago. which is why I do what I do now. I want their voices to be heard, as well as mine as their mother. To the survivors in our community, I want to say that you are not alone. There was a point in time where we thought we were, and going through all of the counseling and help through KSARC, we learned that we are not alone. We met very many people that were so accepting and understanding, and have really helped my children grow through all of this trauma that they've gone through. The trauma of sexual assault is something that can affect the survivor's mental, physical, and behavioral health, their ability to form healthy relationships, remain in school or in the workplace, and so much more. But recovery from the trauma of sexual assault is possible with support. KSARC assisted more than 4,800 individual survivors and their family members just in 2023. Almost half of KSARC clients are teens and children. We know young people are the most vulnerable to sexual assault and the least likely to speak up about it and to be believed when they do. I want to let your community know that free and confidential help is available to survivors, and anyone who needs information about sexual assault. KSARC has a 24-hour resource line and is a good starting point at 888-99-VOICE. We always say we can't change what we can't talk about, so thank you for your leadership and willingness to be loud about sexual assault. Thank you.
And thank you. Next up, we have public comment. The city has accepted public comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to the city clerk no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all city council members and are part of the record. When the clerk calls your name, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Please note that council will receive your input, but upon the advice of our city attorney, we do not engage in discussion of these topics. Staff will make note of items requiring follow-up. City clerk, do we have anybody signed up?
Thank you, Mayor. We do not have anybody signed up, or should I say, we do not have anyone who sent in any written comment for tonight. And I do not see anybody in the virtual attendee office, in the attendee room tonight. But what I do have is one person who signed up to speak live this evening, and that is Victoria Shervinsky. Go right ahead. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Victoria Chervensky, and I'm here representing Innovation Lab High School's Climate Action Club. I'm here on behalf of the club to show support for the city's commitment to developing a climate action plan. We ask that you are bold in your goals and make it count. We, the Climate Action Club, just held our second annual March for Climate event last Saturday, where we hosted 13 local environmental organizations and invited the public to come find volunteer opportunities and show their support for climate action and environmental stewardship. We believe that volunteer opportunities, especially for students, strengthen connections and stewardship with the city and the land. When creating the Climate Action Plan, please consider empowering high school students and pulling them into the process as volunteers. This could look like going to high schools and holding group brainstorms or student forums. This would not only create education opportunities, but also give a sense of purpose and belonging. Getting teenagers outdoors and/or active in city planning would foster citizen involvement that'll stick with them to adulthood. So again, we encourage you to get high school students involved. We have a lot to learn, but also a lot to offer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Victoria. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak? Please raise your hand.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next up, we have reports. The city manager report. So I'm going to kick it over to the city manager.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I have one brief city manager report item, and then that'll be followed by a staff report. Both of these have to do with public safety tonight, and I'll reorient council back to in January as you were contemplating committee assignments for council members. And we had significant interest in the public safety committee. There was more than a quorum of council who were interested. And so what we agreed to do, at least for the beginning of the year, is we would bring items as appropriate to the full council for updates that would have otherwise gone to the public safety committee. And then at a certain point, if you decide, let's think about that committee again. We can do that too. So tonight, the first thing is I'll just orient you to each of the council members will have received a physical copy of the 2023 Fire Department Annual Report. This evening, I also will note for the community that a link has been updated to the fire department's website under annual reports. If you navigate to fire department on the left-hand navigation, annual reports is, I think they're alphabetical, so it's second from the top, I believe. So 2023 will be at the top. Thank you to Interim Fire Chief Mark Risen and to everyone in our fire department for the delivery of service. As it says right on the cover, they're living out the mission to be committed to exceptional service through preparation, prevention, and performance. The annual report will talk about all of that, including then also our partnership with Fire District 10. So information for council to review, and I wanted to call attention to that again for anyone in the community as well. In terms of our staff report, again, this would be information that we won't necessarily always bring a quarterly update, but we did want to update the council and the community as well about the first quarter of data that's been collected with school zone enforcement cameras. So I'm going to welcome to the table our police chief, Ken Suberlick, and Captain Mike Johnson, who will be sharing information with council of what we have learned so far in the implementation of school zone cameras, and also then note too is that there is an area map, council, in your packet, and so if you are looking to track which schools are which, you'll see them listed a number of times in the PowerPoint, and that'll help orient. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our chief and take it away.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council members. Thank you for having us this evening and being able to provide this update. We promised a few months back that we would come back to you and provide you with some data on how the school zone license plate reader program, or LPR program, is going. And I've been working with Captain Mike Johnson. He's put together this presentation, and I think it'll provide the information that you're looking for. And with that, I'd like to introduce Captain Mike Johnson.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Council, for having us. We promised you we'd be back with this information. Just to take you back a little bit, I want to remind everybody that the program was implemented September 20th. We went with a 30-day warning period for violators going through the school zones. They got a mailed warning letter. In October 20th, we went live with the issuance of infractions. So the period we're going to be talking about today is from October 20th to December 31st, which is a few days short of the actual quarter, but with the go live implementation date, it was delayed a little bit. So this is covering 40 school days. So the system is not functioning when there's no school. So just the beacon times. You can see the traffic volume through the city. 2.1, almost 2.2 million cars went through. And the cameras count the cars 24/7. So cars driving through the school zones, that's what that number represents. And you can see on average, 0.4% of the vehicles traveling through the school zones violate the beacon times. And so it just shows it's a very small percentage of the cars going through. Thankfully, most people are obeying the law. Here's how the school zones fared with infractions. In the quarter, 8,850 infractions were issued to drivers. The average speed, we rounded up to about 32 miles an hour. And you can see how the breakdown per school looks. But again, the big number at the bottom is 8,850, and we're going to talk a little bit ahead about how that is on a downward trend, thankfully. Just a note on the slide that the campuses of North Shore Middle School and Woodmore Elementary are co-located. That's why they share a line and they share the same infraction count. Here's infractions by speed. So this gives you an idea of how fast people are driving through the school zones. 27 is the mark where we start issuing infractions. You could see that as high as 21 plus, I think the record that I remember seeing was 56, 51? I think it was 51. 51. Someone's doing 51 through a school zone when the beacons are going. And system-wide, 134 people are doing more than 41 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone. What we wanted to do also is talk to you a little bit about where people who are receiving the infractions are from. And you can see it's a wide net there. It's all the way from Florida up to Alaska. So the next slide. And here's the breakdown by our local jurisdictions. Now, there was a bunch of cities and zip codes underneath that, but these are the jurisdictions where we touch. So where the registered owners of the vehicles live, 999 of them were from Kirkland, for example, which is 11.3% of the total infractions issued. The statistic that we wanted to sort of pay attention to is how many residents of Bothell received infractions through the system. And during the fourth quarter of 23, it was 21%. And we'll talk in a minute that actually is trending down. So that we were excited about that. And for the folks at home who don't realize there's a whole big swath of Bothell that's not actually Bothell, that's the 98012 zip code. Those folks are just north of our city limits. So we're going to continue to take a look at data as we move forward. We're analyzing what is most of the first quarter of 24 at this point. We're about 4 or 5 days short of data, but we do have some preliminary results that are showing that speed is coming down in the school zones. Traffic volume went up, number of infractions went down, and the speed at which we're issuing infractions is also going down, which we're going to be closely monitoring that because we want to make sure that the system is running effectively and it's actually having the desired impact on slowing people down in our school zone. We're going to continue to move forward with posting the information on our website quarterly to start for at least through the first year. So 4 quarters worth of data will be posted to the website so that our community can see the impact of this program. And with that, I will turn it back over to the chief.
I think one important data point that I would like to bring up, a couple data points. First of all, when you were looking at the slides, I was shocked at the volume of traffic that was going through our school zones. That is a data point that's really kind of hard to come by. So having these LPRs in place to actually do traffic count, I think is a benefit beyond just the infraction part of this. It gives us a hard number of how these streets are being used 24/7. In addition to that, I think we talked early on about the impact to our local population on these programs. And what we're finding is it was a little over 20% for local residents in that first 40 days. And based on the trend data that Captain Johnson shared with me, it's down to about 14.7. So we're seeing a drop with local residents. They're understanding that the program's up and running and paying attention to the beacons, which is what we want. The data also indicates that traffic volume is increasing, and it was about 500,000 cars in Q1 increase, but the violations are down, and both in high speed throughout the different school zones. So the program's having the impact that we were hoping for is, I guess, the positive message that I wanted to share. And in addition to that, I would also, if the council doesn't have any objection, the police department would like to explore the use of LPRs for other things, such as red light violations, amber alerts, and stolen car notifications. We would then come back to you at a later date with the data and the options for you to review and evaluate and provide us with direction. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Councilmember Zorns.
Is this where we weigh in?
Yes,
I was looking at the numbers of infractions of speeders. I just thought, oh my goodness, what do we have, 4 or 5 cars out on every shift? How could they manage? Sitting there doing the math of, people speeding through school zones, and that it's a fantastic net for managing people who are going through school zones too fast. I'm very appreciative of that. As far as red light, we know of a couple intersections that could probably use it, and amber alert, and what was the other piece that you?
Amber alert, silver alert, stolen car notifications.
Nothing comes up as an immediate red flag on not to do that, so that's where I would fall in on that.
Councilmember Curd.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm wondering about the impacts to staff time. So when the traffic camera catches someone who's illegally speeding in a school zone, what's the follow-up that staff do or that staff have to take in the department to either mail out the notifications, or does that go on their record? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, I'll let Mike go into a little bit more detail of the process, the signing off of the infractions and the review. For the police department, it's about 38 hours of additional work that we absorbed. But Captain Johnson, could you speak to that?
Yeah, the short version of the process is we have what they call business rules with the vendor, Vera Mobility, that says we don't want to see violations unless they meet this specific criteria. Very clear license plate. The video evidence confirms what the picture and the radar are showing. And then they have 2 layers of human-involved review to make sure that that's working appropriately. Then they send it to us if it meets all the requirements in our set of rules. And then one of our officers actually reviews the whole thing again and confirms that it's actually a violation. That is anywhere from about 20 seconds per, if you're kind of in that groove, to about 45 seconds if there's something a little bit off or you want to confirm the plate or something like that. And then you hit accept, and then it shoots it back to the vendor, who will issue the infraction, and they electronically file with the court.
Interesting. Thank you.
Councilmember Curd, I'll also add that we are also looking at staff time within the court. And so as we consider the use of these programs going forward, we're learning a lot through this. It's kind of our first step of what time would be. Also, in recent state law, it was changed where we have the option of no longer requiring a uniformed officer to review the footage, but we can have a staff member. I think the bill specifically calls out like a traffic engineer. So we'll look at the best administration of the program too, if it is to continue, and make sure that we're getting the right people doing the right work.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the update. I'm really glad to hear that the number of infractions is going down even as traffic rises. That feels really promising. I would love to hear more details on those 3 programs that you mentioned. I would just want to hear them kind of separately because they're different use cases, and appreciate the notes on staffing and making sure we're not signing you guys or anyone else up for a lot of work that they weren't necessarily able to take on. You know what I mean? But yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilmember Alders.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for coming and giving this presentation to the whole council, especially because if we're not on the subcommittee, then we don't get to hear it. And I think this is good information for the entire community to hear. So glad you're here. Glad you're reporting. I would like more information on Q4, and I don't know if you would necessarily have it yet, but especially, so 8,850 infractions, so some odd. I would like to really understand some of the demographics without violating people's privacy. But, are we seeing that certain populations are overrepresented? How is that, especially when it comes to like low income, high income, like drivers? I'm curious to get more information to so that we are not negatively and disproportionately impacting any one community. Go ahead.
That is a great comment and question. One of the things that I like about LPR programs is this particular program and other ones that I've seen that are very successful. They take pictures of vehicles, no driver data. There's no driver data in that photo. So the goal of these programs is to take out that human bias that we all have and really just focus on what is the issue that we're dealing with right here. Is it a speed through a school zone? Is it going through a red light? Is this person driving a stolen car? Is this vehicle flagged for an Amber Alert? That's the thing that many of these programs focus on. Their rear shot of the vehicle, no driver's side shot. Many of the companies actually black out the windows and anybody that may be standing on the sidewalk. So the only people that would really probably have the demographic data would be the courts, unless I'm missing something here, Captain Johnson.
Yeah, the demographic data would not be captured by the system as it is because it gets registered owner information similar to a parking ticket, so it would just capture a name and an address. There's no DOL number issued or anything like that, so we wouldn't know who was driving the vehicle necessarily.
And the nice thing too is this particular violation, it's not a moving violation. It's very much like a parking ticket. It doesn't go on your driving record, where we've seen people impacted where they get these tickets and it's an actual moving violation. Next thing you know, their driver's license is suspended and it becomes this vicious downward cycle. That's not how this program operates. And I will say, from my experience working with the court, there's a lot of programs that they have in place to help address those that may be struggling and challenged with those fines. So I would let the court speak to that, though.
I really appreciate that, and I would be very interested to hear the court give their version of the report, and I know that our city manager's on it.
Yeah, Councilmember, we will make sure to have a follow-up conversation with them and see what we're learning. And then also, as the chief noted, that they do have the discretion of waiving or reducing. So we'll try and see if there's enough data so far to show any statistics of how that's being implemented.
I really appreciate that. One more question for you. So this is a fine-based system, right? People are being fined for their infractions, if I'm understanding correctly. And so I guess I'm then curious, like, how much has this netted the city? And how are those funds being used? How do they get put into the budget?
Well, that is outside of our control. We only issue. But I will forward that off to the city manager.
Thank you, Chief. And so how it's currently working is the fees that come in are going into the general fund. So they're not allocated to one specific program. What our intent is as we're learning more about this, I think the important thing is, as the chief noted, the good news is that we're seeing incidents go down. We never want to look at this as a revenue source. We want to look at this as a deterrent for speeding. So we haven't said anything like, oh, this will fund some sort of ongoing program. One of the things that we do intend to do is to have discussions with council here coming up later this spring, probably in the May timeframe, as we prepare for the 2025-2026 budget, and have a conversation about how we would want to potentially allocate the funding. One option is to continue to put it into the general fund, and then we look at what are the programs that we're spending. Another option that I believe will be preparing for conversation, especially if there's any interest in expanding camera programs, is similar to how we currently have a safety ballot measure, that we'd be looking at, are there things that we can do in terms of investing this money to support the capital improvements around safety in the areas that the schools are taking place. So those are all options and policy choices that we're preparing to have the conversation with council about, and to be able to implement that into the future budget.
Great, I really appreciate it. And thank you for answering questions.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mangy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the update coming back to us on this. I am also pleased to see that the number of violations is going down, even though the number of vehicles is increasing. To the question of expansion, I, for many years, have been firmly against red light cameras, maybe even decades against red light cameras. However, living in the northern part of the city, observing nearly every single time I go to specific intersections, seeing dangerous driving, red light running, pedestrians being put at risk, U-turns that are illegal, causing safety incidents. I am interested in looking at that and hearing more about that. If we can, again, increase safety with some technology where it's unsafe for officers to be, placed and to pursue and go after and, talk to these individuals. I think technology is a good way to do that. And I also like the idea, the city manager's comments on using the funds to improve safety around schools and around these areas. If we can do that with any funds over and above what is paying for the technology, I think that is a great use and a great way to deploy any extra over the top. So I'm interested in hearing more. I don't mind hearing it in pieces as well. If you want to come one at a time, starting with the red light cameras, I would definitely be interested in hearing more. So thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief and Captain, for the presentation. I'm really glad to see that the program is working as designed, decreasing or impacting the intended use of it, which is decreasing infractions. So that's really cool. I just wanted to add my voice to the to my colleagues here and say I'd love to learn more about what you're thinking around the red light and the other options that you mentioned. And looking forward to the conversation in the spring about what's the best way to deploy the excess, the excess money that comes to improve safety around the city.
Thank you.
My feelings are much the same as the rest of council. Specifically, I like what Councilmember Mankey said. I am very happy to see that not just infractions, but also overall speed is going down, which means it's doing what we want, which it's making our kids safer as they're around school. I wish we didn't need that as a tool to do so, but I'm glad we have that as a tool to do so. On the red light cameras, yes, I know we have some problem intersections in the city. Feels like every few months there's a discussion on social media about a couple of the intersections in town where people go through pretty quick. And from that and just talking to people out in the community, I'm pretty confident our community would be very happy if some of those intersections were made more safely. And at the same time, if we can, catch people on Amber Alerts and we have some other tools to use, heck yes, would love that. Also, want to echo Councilmember Mankey and reiterate to the community that I'm very interested in making sure that we reinvest this money into the corridors in which we are earning it, because I want to use this as a safety tool, but a better safety tool is design speed. And if we can have design elements that make it less comfortable for people to drive more quickly, and we have this as a funding source for it, it would be fantastic if we could reduce this revenue source to zero because we don't need it anymore. So that would be, I think, a lovely end goal. And I know we're not having that conversation tonight, but should anybody be watching, I just would like them to know. So thank you guys very much. Really appreciate your time tonight. Oh, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So I forgot, I had a question. I noticed in the map in our agenda, not all schools or not all areas, school areas have the system implemented. Is there a reason why, and are we going to be implementing at more schools?
Well, we can try to make this a team response, but primarily, some schools, cameras are just not a viable option. There are some schools that traffic is such that just trying to get to the school is a challenge. So you're moving it a crawl to those schools. So putting a camera there wouldn't be helpful necessarily. But I can say that our traffic unit and our department is constantly evaluating the schools and the options that we have in front of us. Right now, the schools that we're looking at seem to be the ones that have the largest number of violations. So for right now, I think we're focusing just on those for this foreseeable future.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. I thought of another question. I would love to know, thinking about, I'm just going to admit it, I got a red light ticket once many years ago. And at the time, the ticket was, I think, $150, and that was half of my rent at the time. And now, of course, obviously, I would be very excited if that was the amount I paid for my housing. But it hits my budget differently, right? $150 then versus now. And I wonder if, in trying to keep things somewhat fair, we could look at tying the ticket to maybe the value of the car involved in the infraction, because a set price is going to hit different budgets very, very differently. So I wonder if we can even do that, and then if that's something that could be implemented at some point. And if you look into it and you're like, super no, that's fine. I'm just curious about that.
It's an interesting concept. I don't think that would be something that we could do with the laws the way they are currently.
Okay.
How's that?
It's fair. It was just an idea. But it's interesting.
The one
Yeah.
thing I would say with that, though, again, very much like the school zone infractions, they're treated very much like a parking ticket. And the thing that I personally like about that is it's not perpetuating that problem of once you get that moving infraction, next thing you know, you're suspended. Next thing you know, now you're backwards in court fines. This is handled very much like a parking ticket. And they also have the option to go to court to get that reduced and come up with payment plans and plead their case to the judge. And that's what the court's there for. Our job is to address the violation, and then the court takes care of that end of it. And I think they do a pretty good job at it.
Oh, absolutely. And I did do that once. And I remember taking a whole day off work to go do it. So I think about sometimes the folks who would chase that down are maybe less able to take time off or to take the hit to their pay when they do that. So it's not that the court makes it difficult, but the court operates during like set business hours, right? So that's where I just kind of thinking about little things we could do to create a small difference. Obviously the ticket is still the ticket, but
Right.
just kind of thinking out loud.
I definitely understand what you're saying, though.
Yeah, thank you.
One thing I'll add is I took a note of that, Councilmember Dodd, in that sometimes the change to what we can and can't do, if it's state law, starts with the legislative agenda. And so I know we'll be having a discussion here coming up in the next few months about next year's Washington State legislative agenda. And I'll put a note on there just to remind in case that's something that we want to discuss for council inclusion in the legislative agenda, is looking at some flexibility in terms of fines maybe tied towards assessed value of vehicles. The other thing, not necessarily related to that, but there's a theme of some of the questions that were raised. And so just to put in a word of thanks to the chief is that, as council's aware, the chief has put together a Bothell Police Community Advisory Committee with the mission of being a bridge between the police department and the community and providing a forum for open communication and collaboration. I do believe the chief brought this to that committee in their last meeting to get their perspective of what we're learning so far and to continue to have their input. And so I think as we consider changes or see trends across the city going forward, that's a great resource for the police department to be using to hear from others in the community of how maybe the impact of this program has intended or unintended consequences. So wanted to, again, just that may be something that the chief wouldn't say himself. So I want to say thank you.
I appreciate that. And I've heard great things from my neighbors who are in it. So well done on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Aldrich?
Could we get a recap of the advisory committee's comments on this presentation?
Well, a very short, brief comment is they actually saw this presentation that we provided tonight, kind of get a dry run to see if we're missing anything, let them ask some questions, and it was very helpful. Beyond that, as we start moving forward with what I was asking for, like reviewing other uses for LPRs, we are going to be presenting that with them at the next meeting that we have. It's a month and a half out now. And so we'll be bringing them the data. We'll ask them for their input and recommendations as we go through. And things that that I also ask on that is, the impacts to the community, the cost-benefit analysis, policies and procedures that, that we should have in place, technology policies, for example, that we should have in place. I find that they are a wealth of knowledge, many of them in tech, UW, Cascadia, from all facets of life. They're a wealth of information, and I'm very fortunate to have them available to me to provide direction and some guidance.
Did they offer any direction or guidance on this particular presentation?
They liked it. They liked the data. They felt it was informative, that it was impactful. Do you recall any?
Well, to add on, we met with that group prior to implementation also and said, here's what we're thinking about. So some of the ideas that were brought up were not having information about the drivers to reduce the bias and only the photos from the back of the car. So that information and input came on the front end. And then as far as the presentation, there was some similar concerns about socioeconomic issues and is it causing any unintended consequences. And unfortunately, we don't have any related data to provide any more information on that aspect of it. The system doesn't track that data.
Well, I just really appreciate you meeting with that committee and their thoughts. It sounds like council and your advisors are kind of on the same page, and it's really good to hear. So thank you for that report.
I agree. It's always nice when everybody's in agreement.
All right, I think we're good. Thank you guys so much. All right, next up, we have council committee reports, community reports, and conversations. Council members. All right, moving on.
Nope, I got one. I'm just pulling it up.
Okay.
Sorry. So I attended Coalition on Homelessness. All of the cities were able to give updates on housing policy that they're working on, and tenant protections is a big conversation across the North King County cities. And there was a report on the winter shelter. Knock on wood that we aren't going to have any more freezing nights where the winter shelter needs to be opened up again. It could happen though. Stranger things have happened with our weather. So the Urban League and St. Dunstan's worked together to open for 15 nights. 155 guests were sheltered. 310 meals were provided. Local organizations worked together to donate warm warm winter clothing to guests, and a couple of guests even received move-in assistance. There were no guests from Bothell who went over to Shoreline for shelter. And so there's a breakdown based in costs. They were significantly overfunded. So that means they didn't use the money, about $90,000 that they could have used. So they're looking at, the model for next year. How can more people be served? What are kind of the levers for making sure that people who are in need of shelter can access it? And so that was, I think, a really interesting conversation for cities to be having. We did talk briefly about the opioid settlement money, and NUSA made a suggestion that perhaps the North King County cities could create an ILA to coordinate city funds from those settlements, because a lot of that work would be duplicative. And so that is just a maybe something to think about going down the road. NUSA did give an update. They're going to be prioritizing 2024 housing and homelessness, behavioral health, and age-friendly communities. What does this mean? Okay, so the Interfaith Task Force presented, KCRHA decided not to work with safe parking programs, even though 1 in 5 people who are unsheltered are sheltering in their vehicles. And so that is an interesting note to consider. And then the Oaks also reported that in the last quarter, they helped 33 people into housing, 81 people total served. So I've really loved those meetings. There's always really great information being shared. There's a good amount of effort that is coordinated across North King County, but also with King County to address homelessness. And yeah, it's always pretty inspiring to see what people are doing. So thank you for hearing my report.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. On March 20th, Councilmember Mankey and I attended the North Shore Parks and Recreation Service Area Board meeting. I was attending as an alternate, and we had a lot of really good discussion. So it's time to now think about, will there be another levy and what would that look like? So there was discussion around that. We also talked through what it may look like, and would we want to look at moving the Kenmore Senior Center into that district? Right now it's a separate facility, and then the North Shore Senior Center is contracted with the city of Kenmore to service that facility. So I'm saying that very carefully because they're not, the facility's in Rhododendron Park in Kenmore, and it's not part of the program, but the same people run it as do the North Shore Senior Center. So it's kind of an interesting, very specifically governmental sort of difference. So we talked through that. And then the things I wanted to call out is as part of the levy that we are all funding right now, there were a number of maintenance things that were being addressed. So the building envelopes repairs are underway. The pedestrian bridge handrail repairs are underway. The surface has already been fixed. A lot of really good repairs are being made to make sure that this facility will be available for a very long time, which is exciting. I also got confirmation that you do not have to be a senior citizen to go check it out. They are actually sometimes thought about changing the name. So if, like me, you thought coffee and pie sounded really good, they're not going to check your ID, and you can go. The other thing is they're working on a youth center needs assessment to make sure that if we do look at a community center as the NPRSA, that it will actually serve the needs within our community. And a bunch of different council members from different cities were able to link up the director of the North Urban Human Services Alliance with the folks working on an advisory board for that needs assessment, since there's a lot of really good overlap there. Those are, I think, enough updates, and Councilmember Mankey, I think, will let me know if I missed one.
Thank you for doing the heavy lifting of explaining all of that. I was about to do it, but you got in front of me, so thank you. The only thing I think I would add is that I think a lot of people don't know that the NPRSA actually owns the two buildings, the Senior Center building and the building across the street. The Senior Center is a separate nonprofit entity and is a tenant of those buildings and rents from the NPRSA. So that's a really interesting thing. And we also received an update from the Senior Center on how they're funded. They are 50% funded through government contracts for programs, 30% through user fees, and 20% through private philanthropy. So if you're looking to donate or make a gift, end-of-life gift, consider the Senior Center in your giving. I know they're looking to more even out their funding sources. Right now, it's a little bit lopsided based on what you typically see at nonprofit entities. So there was some discussion around that going into the levy for next year on what that continued contract might look like. So I think that's the only thing that I would add.
All right. Next up, we have a consideration, projected agenda discussion. We have the consideration of frontage regulation revision process memo that we've talked about a couple times over the last month or two. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. And just as a transitionary statistic, I'll note that I learned last week that the youngest member of the North Shore Senior Center is 12 years old. So if anyone knows anyone younger than 12, they can try and break that record. Moving forward, as council will recall, we did some cleanup work in the fall on the council protocol manual. And under the item of placing agenda items on the agenda, one of the things we discussed was around identifying topics that council might want to consider and then having staff come back with more information before deciding, is this what council wants to dedicate staff time to? So we have another one of those items for consideration tonight that is, it was brought up originally on February 13th and has been scoped. We're being joined tonight by Aaron Lenhart, the Public Works Director, as well as Boyd Benson with information on the program. What I would want to note then too is that, again, at the end of this, while there's no vote to make any changes, what we're really looking for is direction on, do you want work on this to commence beyond the scoping? So you'll hear a little bit more about what that includes. And with that, I'll turn things over to Aaron to kick things off.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. It's nice to see you all. So Kyle took some of the words that I was going to say, but I will just say that what we're here to do this evening is to briefly describe to you the issue at hand and a proposed process, and also interim measures that we're taking while this process sort of runs its course. And with that, I will turn it over to Boyd.
Thank you, Director Lenhart, and good evening. Next slide, please. So once again, this is a quick briefing about adding frontage improvements to the forthcoming agenda item. Staff is requesting that council deliberate on this. We're not asking for direct feedback or policy comments at this point. And we will go to the next slide, please. So just a quick overview. We last updated our frontage improvements within municipal code in 2021. We did add some clarifications. The previous code was pretty difficult to wade through. And at that time, we added a 50% value that you had to reach a threshold with a project to trigger frontage improvements. Since that time, things have changed. House Bill 1110, 1337 back in 2023 significantly changed what is allowed to occur on lots. And as we'll discuss in a minute, the code that's in effect right now does not address those. It was constructed and written prior to that time. Next slide. So today what we're asking is just we're providing this quick overview, any feedback, and then a decision to put this item on the agenda. What we plan to do then is bring this forward to Planning Commission. If council so chose to put this on the forthcoming agenda, bring it through the Planning Commission process and back to council. And we've developed a pretty rapid timeline for this, which is in the memo, with the goal of having this completed by 2020 or the end of Q3, should council ask us to proceed. So a very quick overview, just 2 more slides, I believe. Right now, there have been questions about what the city constructs with respect to frontage and what private developers construct, and it's a balance. Right now, city improvements are typically funded by impact fees and other measures. They're intended to address system-wide improvements to try to get traffic moving in and around the city of Bothell. What we've seen in the past is large development comes in, they pay their fair share of those improvements so that they can mitigate traffic, but they also address their frontage. And that's because they generate trips. Pedestrian trips, if you have 1 lot and it turns into 20 lots, they're generating pedestrian trips. They need to use sidewalks. They're generating additional vehicle trips. There's road improvements. That's where we see these frontage improvements. And it like I said, the previous model works very well with subdivisions and commercial projects. It just does not really address these single lot redevelopment projects that we're seeing now with middle housing and ADUs. Okay, so here is a flow chart that kind of describes our existing process. And right now, once again, anything that's subdivision, multifamily, or commercial, you just do frontage. You mitigate your impacts. You're adding trips. We want to make sure that's taken care of. For single lot residential, we have thresholds, and it's for the same whether you're adding an ADU or you're dividing an existing dwelling unit or adding a dwelling unit. Is the cost of your proposal more than 50% of the existing value? And if it is, then you do frontage. And if it's less, the city still wants to make sure under current code that you're addressing the new trips or the new impacts. So it'd be, okay, well, we can ask you to improve the frontage up to 25% of your project costs. So put in an asphalt path to get people from your project to an existing sidewalk and the rest. So that's what we currently have. Next slide, please. For the proposed, for a policy that could be considered by council is kind of mixing this up. What we typically would see is large subdivisions, commercial entities, adding lots of trips, no problem, add your frontage. But then kind of looking at the single lot redevelopment with a closer lens. So with House Bill 1337, the city is not allowed to ask for frontage improvements with ADUs. It's pretty simple to say, look, okay, ADUs are exempt from frontage. If you divide an existing dwelling unit into 2 dwelling units, you have a home and you subdivide it, you put a wall down the center and now it's a duplex. Well, it has the same carrying capacity as the previous building. It has the same square footage. It could have the same occupants, the same cars. Maybe that's not appropriate then to ask for frontage. So that's kind of on the far left. The policy discussion that staff would, if council would like to look into this, is what is that missing part? You have a single lot and you have 1 home, and you choose to demolish that home and put in 4 dwelling units, which could be allowed by middle housing. It could be 4 townhomes. And then those can also be subdivided with House Bill 1110. Should those impacts be mitigated? Should frontage be installed? And what we've looked at in the past is trying to make sure that impacts are mitigated at time of development so the city doesn't have to come back and take care of that. So that's that kind of missing part. Once again, larger developments, subdivisions, big commercial projects, yeah, mitigate your impacts, install frontage. ADUs, House Bill 1337 says no. So the policy discussion we bring forward is this one in between. And that's what we'd be discussing at a later date. Next slide. So next steps, council feedback on this general approach and timeline. Would you like to see this on a future agenda? If so, would you like this to go through Planning Commission to get to look at staff proposed policy and the rest, and then provide a council recommendation? We have interim measures in place at this time. They're summarized in the memo, but the Public Works Director has authority over Title 17, which includes frontage. And after discussions with staff and council, our code can't be in conflict with RCW. So House Bill 1337, with respect to frontage requirements for ADU, would supersede our code. So we can address those type of developments in the near term as an interim measure should council wish to look at this more closely. And then the last part is bringing this forward for public comment and a public hearing, and then an ordinance. And I think that is it, except for our summary slide. And so at this time, we'd like to entertain any questions and to get some guidance on whether we'd like to see this added to a future agenda and have staff complete some effort on behalf of this issue. Anything to add? Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And I feel like bringing this back fairly quickly, so I really appreciate that. I'm super interested in coming back to this. I would ask that when we look at potential changes, if we can look at ideally real projects, but even just mock-ups of things that you've seen to see what would have been required under the current regulations, what would be required under the new ones, so we can really appreciate the impact of the changes. I think that can be difficult in such technical language. So just different examples of ADUs, if someone is, like you have here, dividing an existing dwelling unit versus adding more, just to really make sure we understand the consequences. Thank you.
Councilmember Zorns.
Yeah, I would like to ditto what Councilmember Dodd said, and I know you would. There's plenty of examples around Bothell where we've had a single-family home become 4 units. So yes, please, I would like to see this come forward. And thank you for a really easy, digestible presentation. For as fast as it was going, as much gas as you were giving it, as we were going through it, it was great. So thank you.
Councilmember Aldrich.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, for bringing this back to us, and I'm very impressed at the timeline that you are proposing. I would like to see this come back to us, and I think the item that I'm considering most giving the most thought to is your suggestion that it doesn't necessarily need to go through the Planning Commission. And so I guess, correct me if I'm wrong. I saw something saying that we don't necessarily have to go to the Planning Commission.
So that's language within the code. I typically don't deal with that language. Okay. We could follow up on that at a later date, but it was very apparent to staff that this would want to be looked at pretty quickly. So we added that in there.
So the existing code refers Title 17 to the Planning Commission and does allow council to decide if they would like to take it up immediately instead of sending it through the Planning Commission first.
And so I guess I would like to hear from my colleagues what their thoughts are on that, because it sounds like there's a hasty but methodical way of doing it, which is what you're proposing going through the Planning Commission, but there's also an even faster possibility. And so I think we should give due consideration to both options. I don't entirely know which way I would lean. I think I would actually lean towards going through the Planning Commission, but I really would like to hear from my colleagues on it.
Councilmember Curry.
Thank you. Conveniently, I was going to speak to that. Yes, thanks for the presentation. I really want to point out that it seems like just a couple weeks ago we heard people coming in to give public comment, and so addressing Public Works, addressing issues that people have in our community is really important, and connecting that line is really cool for me to see as a new member of council. I think that this should go through public comment through Planning Commission, mostly because I recall having some deep discussions maybe 2 years ago on Planning Commission about the pattern of improvements and kind of a patchwork quilt that Bothell tends to get itself in with, be it gravel lots in our downtown or patchy sidewalk networks. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that dichotomy between getting everything done, patchwork wise or otherwise. So I think that is worthwhile to send it through Planning Commission if there's capacity for the Planning Commission to deal with it quickly. I don't want it to be drawn out because there are impacts to our community from people who are looking to develop an ADU, and right now, there's financing varies by the day. So I think I want to see it done quickly, or interim measures be put in place that can address people's direct concerns right now.
Mayor, the one thing I'll also add just from a timeline perspective, and as the director mentioned, one of the things why we also raised this was timeline. We want to hear that. But just also for clarification, as you've seen from some of the other work we've been doing recently, the Department of Commerce gets kind of first and last touch at this as well. So we do need to provide 60-day review before council would take action in this, and then we'll also send it to them afterwards to make sure that we did what we said we were going to do. So as we think about timeline, just kind of keep that in mind too, is that no matter which path we go, whether it goes to the Planning Commission or if it came straight to council, and which could end up being one or two touches, maybe the same timeline as Planning Commission. It just means it would get to you faster. It doesn't mean that you make a decision faster, but either of those options, Commerce will get a first review, and they do ask for a 60-day review window. You can request an expedited review, but I think we're learning that much like resources everywhere are getting more and more constrained, that expedited review is typically not being approved these days.
Councilmember Dodd?
Thank you. I do like it going to the Planning Commission. They're meant to be our deep experts. If it's going to add a lot to the timeline, I would like to talk about it. I also think we've talked about doing joint meetings with our boards and commissions before, so potentially a study session when this does come back as a joint meeting with the Planning Commission could be a good way to do a lot of that all at the same time.
Councilmember Mankey?
Thank you, Mayor. I am interested in looking at this. I think this could go a lot of different ways because, you can look at doors, you can look at bedrooms in a unit. 4-bedroom house, for instance, could have 2 adults, empty nesters in there, or there could be 2 adults, 3 kids, or it could be 3 kids could be teenagers and they'll have cars. Like, you just don't know how many people are in a unit. I think if they were to tear something down and build 4 townhomes, that's a lot more scale and difference than a detached dwelling unit. So I'm interested in hearing this. I do think it should go before Planning Commission. And I do like Councilmember Dodd's idea of perhaps a joint study session. I always love learning. This is not my area of expertise. And I think the more dialogue, conversation you can have as a group, the better outcome you're going to get to, whatever it is. So I am supportive of this.
Councilmember Zorns?
Real quick, and I'm going to state the obvious. I only want this to go as fast as staff can manage it, where we can do a good job at it. I don't want to move it so fast that we've just kind of put a Band-Aid on something that can work and then look back and go, we should have tweaked it differently. So in as much as it's feasible to go quickly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And staff have been working on this since the laws passed. So it's in development already. So I think that won't be a problem. And just to address again the interim situation is that we do have options when it comes to ADUs in particular that we are implementing now that we can do it while the process runs its course. So I assure you that those unique issues will be addressed.
Just to add one thing to Director Lenhart, please. We don't know how these new allowances are going to play out. So no one wants to go quickly on this, but I think we should also understand that we may be changing this next year again, right? So I really hope we can look at it with that lens because we don't know. I mean, it could all be someone tearing down a home and putting in 4. That's not bad. It could all be detached ADUs on House Bill 37, and that's really easy. So we'd hope to get as far as we can. As Director Lenhart mentioned, we've already looked at other cities, what they're doing with their older code, and there are some interesting things. And we're going down that path as well. So, thank you.
I had a couple quick questions. One of the slides said if certain conditions were met, then utilities improvements were capped at 25% of project cost. That seems like a pretty high percentage of project cost as a tax on utilities. Like, what can it go to if those conditions are not met?
Yes, sir. And that was for frontage improvement. That's in Title 17. Now, that was if you don't, under current code.
Yeah.
Not saying future.
Yeah.
Under current code, if you're not demolishing a home, putting up 4, but you're adding a addition that's
More than 50% of value?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where the cap comes in. What we don't want to do, and there's some discussion of proportionality, which we're not going to get into now. We want to make sure that whatever's required, it can't equal the cost of the project, right?
Yeah.
So the 25% was what was settled on back
Okay.
in 2021.
Even 25% seems startlingly high to me for utilities. I guess I would just say that as we go through this, like, if we need to improve utilities because of a lack of maintenance or age, like, that's something that I'm uncomfortable asking a new development to pay for because the whole rest of the city's been using it for years. Like, I would prefer just to have them go up to and hook up to the system and perhaps pay an impact fee if that's an option. Like, I would also just say anything that we do this that gives predictability before somebody kicks off a project, I would like that too.
And I did not do a good job with that. The 25% was for frontage improvements like sidewalks and roads.
Okay.
It's exclusive of utilities.
Okay.
But yes,
Got it.
understood, and yes, sir.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, no, I want to see this on a future agenda. I think what the city manager said about, like, Commerce has 60 days, like, this isn't something we need to rush next week anyway, because we couldn't do it by then. Yeah, I mean, our community has been pretty clear that they want to see middle housing. And if there are barriers to getting the middle housing that our community wants, I want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we're helping them accomplish their goals. So I'm excited to see this come back. I think we're good.
I think we got the clear direction we're looking for, and we will get this moving forward, scheduled for planning commission and bringing back to the city council.
And also just wanted to reiterate the fact that I really appreciate just the speed and pace with which this came back to us. It doesn't feel like it's been that long since we touched this the first time, and thank you for that. All right, it's 7:08, and I am looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Councilmember Dodd.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Dodd and a second from Councilmember Aldrich to approve the consent agenda. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none. City Clerk?
When I call your name, please say yes or no. Councilmember Zorns?
Yes.
Mayor Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Alders?
Yes.
Councilmember Kurd?
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey?
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Alcabra?
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Thank you. All right. First up on our agenda bill, first agenda bill up tonight is Agenda Bill 24054, Resolution accepting $500,000 from the State of Washington Climate Commitment Act and authorizing the city manager to execute the grant contract to assist in completion the Climate Action Plan, and an ordinance amending the 2024 general fund budget to increase by $500,000, including authorizing of 2 full-time equivalent positions. City manager.
That says it all right there, Mayor. Yes, indeed. The council's first action will be asked of, do you want to accept a grant? It is over the threshold that requires city council approval. And then, as you mentioned, we are also requesting, we would be amending the budget to put the money in, as well as in order to deliver on this grant, we are looking for the authorization for 2 positions. With that, I'm going to turn things over to, we're joined by our Community Development Director, Jason Greenspan, as well as our Finance Director, Quan Wong, to answer any questions council may have about these 2 actions. With that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening, City Council, Mayor Thompson. As you know, the City Council vision was adopted in 2023 to provide a solid environmental legacy in Bothell and to mitigate the impacts and effects of climate change. It included several endorsed environmental stewardship strategic priorities, like supporting meaningful climate action and preservation of the city's tree canopy. Additionally, you'll recall that our comprehensive plan, which is being updated right as we speak, will include Bothell's very first climate change and resiliency element. We'll prioritize future actions to reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions and avoid creating or worsening climate impacts on vulnerable populations and overburdened communities. Thus far, we've been able to allocate federal funds to support these environmental initiatives, and those total a little over $560,000 in federal funds. An additional $500,000 has now been made available from the Department of Commerce through a grant to further implement these priorities. And all of this helps the city address the legal requirement that's set forth by HB 1181, which was signed into law in July of 2023. And that amends the Growth Management Act, mandating the inclusion of a climate change element in our comprehensive plan. The grant's going to help us fully develop a greenhouse gas emissions reduction subelement and a resiliency subelement. We'll be able to identify actions by both public and private sector actors to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in areas like municipal operations, procurement, vehicle and building electrification, per capita vehicle miles traveled, land use, and waste reduction. The grant is also going to provide the resources and the impetus to advance other key planning initiatives like updating our code regulations and getting our urban forestry management plan started. And of course, community engagement and outreach is going to be fundamental to everything that we do in this process. Now, getting the climate planning work underway and completed is one key step that federal and state grants are helping with now. But in order to implement and sustain that work, that's really critical. And I'm requesting authorization for 2 full-time employees within the Community Development Department, comprising 1 planner and 1 senior planner. And I think investing in personnel to steward and implement this climate action work will achieve meaningful progress on the Council's environmental initiatives and help us comply with state law. Ultimately, we'll achieve measurable community benefits from focusing on local climate action, including improved air and water quality, enhanced green spaces, cooler streets, and increased resilience to climate-related change challenges and disruptive events. So just to conclude, we're asking for you to approve a resolution accepting the climate grant from the Department of Commerce and to approve an ordinance amending the 2024 budget to increase the general fund by $500,000 to authorize 2 full-time positions and complete and implement work related to climate action. Happy to answer any questions, as is our Finance Director.
Councilmember Mankey?
Sorry.
Sorry, I was looking that way.
Do you want to go first?
Your light is on.
Okay. You should go first. Like, we're not used to it, so it's good.
All right. Quick question on the 2 positions. Are these limited term positions?
We're not anticipating at this point that they would be limited term.
Okay. So I guess when the funds run out, what's our plan for continued funding of the positions if we thought a couple years out?
So that will be brought to your consideration during the 25-26 budget process. So our anticipation is we'll be fully spending the state grant, and future funding will be part of the 25-26 budget discussion.
Okay. And then I think that may be my only question. Thank you.
Councilmember Alders.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for this presentation. Thank you for putting so much thought and care into responding to the legislation, but also to, I think, implementing council's priorities for a climate action plan. This is really comprehensive. I love seeing that there's an urban forestry element that's being included. And I think a lot of us up here have been looking forward to this for a long time. And the way that you're going about packaging it with the grant and with budget makes a lot of sense to me. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily have any questions, but thank you.
Councilmember Dodd.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Really excited to see the results of this. I realize that that's way in the future, but just excited to get there. I did want to call out, we had a great comment during public comment from Innovation Lab High School Climate Club asking to be involved. And I would extend that. Kids in Bothell can go to any of the North Shore high schools. So I would want to make sure we outreach to all of them, just to multiply that by 5, I guess. But I think it's really important because this work is realistically not for us. It's for the next generation and the generation after that. So anything we can do to involve these kids who are raising their hands, I think would be really great.
We're so focused on implementation. As a planner, I love this phase of the work, but really it's those partners 5 years from now that we're going to really rely on to implement this work.
I hope those students end up at UW Bothell then. Although they're very talented and will probably go all over, but UW Bothell will be where some of them might end up.
Councilmember Zorns.
I've waited a long time for trees to get a meaningful discussion, and I really appreciate it that they're on the radar now. I've been reading a book called The Good Rain by Timothy Egan, who's quite a historian for things in this area. And at one point, I'm going to subject you all to a quote that I think is absolutely genius. But he makes the comment that trees are our lungs. And I think that is a very good analogy, that they are our lungs. They are what give us the air that we can inhale. So I appreciate that this is a part of that. Urban forestry can be on all kinds of scales, from, a small pocket to something like North Creek Forest. So getting people on board who can help direct this conversation, I'm jumping up and down on the inside here. I'm very excited, so thank you.
Councilmember Curd.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. I'm also excited. I have a question, kind of wrapped up in a personal experience. I am a planner as well, but somewhat unorthodox way of getting there through geology and earth sciences. And so I'm wondering, when you go out for applications for these positions, what in the job description is going to cue people into what the role is really about? Are we looking for people from the forestry sector to come in and give feedback on urban forestry as a planner, or are we looking for strict planning backgrounds? What are those positions really going for?
Well, I think that really is going to come down to how we phrase the recruitment. Our job descriptions generally are broad enough to capture a number of disciplines and backgrounds. And I think what I've seen in recent recruitments that I've done is when you cast a sort of wide but exciting net in this work, you get some specialization and some applicants that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see from disciplines and backgrounds that aren't the traditional route of a planner. And frankly, I'm hoping to see some of that.
Cool. Thanks.
I am enthusiastically, yes, please. Accepting grants is usually a good deal for us, but I'm really excited to see the planning department get a couple new hands on deck to help us do some of this work that I've heard a lot of people up here mention that they're so excited that we're finally getting started. So we're really excited about a lot of this work that we're doing. A lot of the work we want to do is through your department, and yes, we're super excited, and thank you for this. Would anybody like to make a motion?
And just for clarity, we will be looking for two separate motions tonight. First for the resolution accepting the grant, and then second for an ordinance amending the budget and adopting the 2 additional FTE authorization.
Councilmember Alders.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we approve of resolution accepting a grant and authorizing the city manager to execute a grant contract for $500,000 from the State of Washington Climate Commitment Act to assist in the completion of the Climate Action Plan in accordance with HB 1181.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Alders as read and a second from Councilmember Dodd. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Seeing none. City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns,
Yes.
Mayor Thompson,
Yes.
Councilmember Alders,
Yes.
Councilmember Kurd,
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Alcabra.
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Fantastic. Next motion. Councilmember Dodd?
Thank you. I move to approve an ordinance. Sorry, the language is killing me. I move to approve an ordinance amending the 2024 budget to increase the general fund by $500,000 and authorizing 2 full-time equivalent positions to complete and implement the work.
Second.
I have a motion as read from Councilmember Dodd and a second from Councilmember Kurd. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? Councilmember Mankey?
Thank you, Mayor. I do have concerns about hiring 2 full-time regular positions on a limited term funding basis. However, I do recognize that a planner and a senior planner going to be pretty hard to recruit somebody on a limited term basis. So given that and the fact that the work is important and we are also recruiting for existing staff positions, I think it'll be easier to recruit all together. So I will be supporting tonight and looking forward to this work being done.
City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I call your name. Councilmember Zorns,
Yes.
Mayor Thompson,
Yes.
Councilmember Alders,
Yes.
Councilmember Kurd,
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd,
Yes.
and Deputy Mayor Alcabra.
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. It was good to see you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Agenda Bill 24055, Board and Commission Appointments. City Manager.
All right. Thank you, Council. Following last week's
Wait, what?
interviews of
Give me just a second. I thought that we would jump to this because we have about 20 minutes before our break, but we're going to have to break after we vote for the clerks to count things anyway. So I thought that like the break during the counting would be a good use of time.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's good clarification. We're a little ahead of projected agenda, so that does help. And as you mentioned, there will be some ballot counting and then reporting out here to come. So last week, the council did interview candidates for consideration to appointment of 7 of the city's boards and commissions. Tonight, you get to vote with the process and to really administer that selection. I'm going to turn things over to our Deputy City Clerk, Robin Schaefer. Robin, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Tonight before you is the opportunity to appoint 14 vacant positions across 5 of the council-appointed boards and commissions. And for those of you who are just joining us on this topic, here's a brief summary of the process. On January 15th, the city began our recruitment and opened up the applications. On February 6th, we held a board and commission open house for folks to find out about the positions and get more information. The turnout was phenomenal and went way beyond our expectations. The city received 53 applications. Due to this overwhelming response, on March 5th, council appointed a subcommittee to review the applications. Once that was completed, on March 19th, council approved the subcommittee's recommendations and added 4 more applicants to the list. On March 26th, council conducted the interviews, and now in front of you tonight is the opportunity to appoint 14 vacant positions. Once those appointments are made, we ask that you motion and vote to ratify them. So you all have voting sheets in front of you. I ask that you please fill out your name at the top and mark under where it says round 1. Then circle your choices according to how many are shown below the name of the commission. It tells you how many to vote for in each category. And then once you're done, you can pass the sheets down to Amy, and we will take a short break, actually a long break because it's almost Ramadan time. and we can tally the votes and come back with the results. And for those of you watching, we have Deputy Mayor Alcabra online virtually, and he has been sent the same voting sheet via email, and I have already received his response.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a fast comment. I don't want to rabbit trail us. At a future time, I was gone for the month of March with the passing of my mother. And so I think that I'm pretty sure that I would have been on board with everything that council was doing on how we move this process forward. Looking back at it in hindsight is I feel real badly that people took time and sacrificed and filled out applications and didn't get a chance to speak to us. And so at a point down the road, not tonight, could we have a revisit on how we give everybody a chance to speak? I am going to be on my mind adding someone who applied but didn't get a chance to speak for herself. So when she gives us the results and there's a weird name there, that's why. And if we could at some point be noodling ways so that everybody has a chance for their voice to be heard, because it was a phenomenal turnout for our open house, and I would love to have a chance where everybody could speak and we could get to know them a little better.
Deputy Mayor, I'm told that you could send us to break.
Okay, so let's break until 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
Is that okay? I don't have the sheet in front of me, the script, so just winging it.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
All right, welcome back. We are moving on, and we should have some results from the count.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we do. So I've been here about 14 years, and I think this is the first time I've seen us get it in the first round. So congratulations. Round one. And the first board we're going to look at is Parks and Recreation. We've received, Laura Borner has received 5 votes. Tynan Gable received 1 vote. Malia Caracoglia received 5 votes. Joanne Harkinen received 2 votes. And Scott Brown received 1 vote. So we have those that made it past the majority are Laura Borner and Malia Caracoglia. For planning, we have Yumna Shaman with 3 votes, Scarlett Lever Ortiz with 5 votes, Sarah Gustafson with 4 votes, Charles Landau with 2 votes, Katie Sills with 5 votes, Zachary Ott with 1 vote, and Nancy Schaefer with 1 vote. So our 3 chosen are Scarlett Lever Ortiz, Sarah Gustafson, and Katie Sills. For Landmark, we have 7 votes for Andrew Burgess, 5 votes for Andrew Salazar, 2 votes for Celia Newton, and 7 votes for Vicky Sompi. So that would leave it with Andrew Burgess, Andrew Salazar, and Vicky Sompi. For Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, we had unanimous votes for Jesse Olson and Nancy Pipinich. And for Arts, we have A.C. Peterson receiving 3 votes, Hillary Long receiving 6 votes, Mary Beth Turk receiving 7, Nikita Thakalath receiving 7, and Sarah Jamshidi receiving 5. So the majorities received are Hillary Long, Mary Beth Turk, Nikita Thakalath, and Sarah Jamshidi. And I would appreciate a motion and vote to ratify the appointees.
So moved.
Second.
I figured this is the one time I get to do that because she's the one that asked for it. I have a motion from myself and a second from Councilmember Mankey. City Clerk?
Thank you. Please say yes or no when I say your name. Councilmember Zorns.
Yes.
Mayor Thompson.
Yes.
Councilmember Alders.
Yes.
Councilmember Kurd.
Yes.
Councilmember Mankey.
Yes.
Councilmember Dodd.
Yes.
And Deputy Mayor Alcabra.
Yes.
Passes 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The time is now 8:03 p.m. We will adjourn to executive session pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1I, potential litigation, for 45 minutes with no action expected, ending at 8:48 p.m. After that, we will adjourn from executive session, the meeting, and then move to closed session. Executive session is now done. We are adjourning the meeting and moving into closed session.